So let's get into how does generative AI actually work. So you've heard me probably mention a couple of things like we need data, we need to train, all of these different things. So we'll look at this and we'll look at it in a simplified way, hopefully. So first of all, we need to train these models. So the first thing we got to do if we want to train is we need a large data set. And typically these data sets are just taken from the internet because the internet is public information at the end of the day. Then the model learns relationships between words and concepts. Okay, if I have, a ball and I have the color red and the concept of round, okay, the model will start to learn that, oh, if I'm talking about a red ball, then I might be referring to this round red object. Okay, so they start to learn patterns, they start to link between words and different concepts. I know that a cat and a dog have things in common, but I also know that they're different. So it's learning patterns between what things have in common, but where they're different also. So a pet is, or a dog and a cat is a pet. They're both animals, they both eat, they both have paws, but then obviously they're different in loads of different ways. Okay, so if we could collect, let's say we wanted to teach a model about cats and dogs, then we would collect a data set on everything we know about cats and dogs. Okay, and then we would feed it into the model and we would say to it, try and learn the relationship between cats and dogs. So from the input to the output, what we need to do is we need to change the parameters. So if I am putting in, what does a cat look like? I need a certain output. And if that output isn't, if it's, let's say, I'm looking the output to be cat, but it's giving me dog, then I need to adjust the parameters to make sure that the output gives me exactly the output that I'm looking for. And they do this billions of times. And like said earlier, ChatGPT 4.5 now has trillions of parameters. So this has to be done trillions of times. And this is, again, all done within the learning process. So we will pass data through and then we'll see, was that the correct answer? No. Okay, go back and adjust the parameters. And now pass the data through again and check it again. And it does this billions, trillions of times. And this is where all the massive computer power comes from, because this takes processing power to do this. Finally then, once we've kind of got, that's the majority of the work is done, we also need to refine the outputs. Normally what this is done by using humans. So we will, if I put in a certain prompt and the model gives me an output, then what these companies do is they go to humans for feedback to see, is that a good quality output or not? And also obviously for safety reasons as well, because if I put in, something, make me a bomb, if the model gives me out the instructions for that, then that's not a safe model. Okay, so there's certain things we need to refine. We basically need to put guardrails on, and we need to make sure that this thing cannot be misused. Okay. So that's the training process. That's, in a nutshell. There is a lot more that goes on, within each of these different sections here. Okay, obviously the data collection, there's compression techniques need to be used. There's loads of different things that goes on there. There's loads of different things that goes on here, and at each level, we're not going to go into the details of all that. Okay, we're just going to keep it at a high level. So that's the training process in a nutshell. So now once the thing has been trained, once it knows about different words and different concepts, how does it generate text? Well, first of all, it needs to process what you're putting into the model. Okay, so the very first thing that it'll do is it takes your prompt and it converts it to tokens. Okay, and then it wants to analyze what is the context. So from the training process, from the words and concepts that it now understands, the relationships and the patterns that it sees, what is the context that it is trying to understand from your input. Okay, and then it uses prediction. Like we say, these models are just trying to predict what is the next word. So trying to see, this is the context, and now predict what is it that you want. Okay, and then it just does this over and over and over again. It does this with every token, with every set of tokens, with every entire prompt. Okay, it says, what is it you want? And then can I predict what you will want? And then it keeps doing this over and over between these two. And then finally, when it's finished, it will output whatever the prompt is, or the output from the prompt. So yeah, it kind of looks like this. Your prompt will be converted into tokens. Okay, the model will consider all the context, so it essentially starts to process the tokens, and then it tries to predict what the next token is. and it will do this over and over and over, token by token by token by token. And then finally it does kind of the reverse back here. So once it's finished with these three kind of central, well, it's really the context analysis and the prediction. Once it's finished with that, then it'll do the reverse. It'll go from tokens back to text again. So that's essentially what these things are doing at the lowest level. So generative AI doesn't understand in the human sense. It recognizes patterns and it predicts the statistical likelihood of these things, of that pattern or that prediction continuing. So it sounds like, it doesn't sound like it's doing much. It's just trying to analyze tokens and then it's trying to predict what the next token is. But you can see that the results from doing this over billions or trillions of different parameters is actually becoming quite useful. And these things, taking the world by storm. So what does generative AI do well? Well, as we've seen, content creation is a really good one. Drafting proposals, writing emails, reports, articles, whatever it may be. Very, very good at creating brand new content. Analysis and summarization, also quite excellent at. So they can summarize documents or extract, key points and compare sources. So they can do all kinds of analysis. Coding and technical side of things, they can write code snippets, debug code to try and figure out where the problems are within the code. And creating documentation is a more widely used application of these tools, because if I already have my code written, it can be quite time consuming to create documentation for that. But if I just feed all of my code into one of these models, they're really, really good at creating documentation. Again, being an assistant, whether that's a creative assistant or a research assistant, they can help you increase your productivity from doing the job of one person to maybe doing the job of 3 people. Okay, so the creative assistant is good for when you're trying to brainstorm, you want some maybe outlines or templates, things like that. So very good for that. Like I say, research assistant as well, quite good at helping you start research and continue and help you with your research. So again, just like having a research assistant on hand constantly. And then translation and editing. So language translation is a good one that's become more and more popular. And grammar checking, we've seen that probably already a lot of the times with things like Grammarly, or even within Microsoft Word, they're starting to put these AI tools in. But this is some of the stuff that generative AI does quite well that we have seen, since the explosion of this technology. So the flip side of that is, what are the limitations of generative AI? What are some of the things that we need to watch out for? You've already heard me mention a few of them, but let's get into some of the details. So accuracy. These things can present false information confidently. Now that's key. It will confidently lie to you. And this is some of the things, that we need to verify the information that comes out of these models. We can't just blindly trust what they're saying. There is no real-time knowledge. Now, there are ways that some of the companies have got around that with basically giving the model access to search the internet. If the model does have access to search the internet, then it will have real-time knowledge. But typically, these models will have training data cutoff dates. So that is where the real-time knowledge ends. So there are some reason limitations. Again, these things are becoming less and less a problem, but they were and still are in a lot of the free versions. So for example, you try and ask ChatGPT to count to 200 and it probably can't do it. So simple things, these complex models can't really do a lot with complex mathematics, because again, they're only looking at tokens. Okay, they're large language models. They're not designed to do any kind of mathematical reasoning. They may miss logical inconsistencies, and you'll see this. They start to go in loops sometimes when they kind of just get stuck into a pattern that they can't get out of, and they can't verify facts independently. These models will typically have bias within them, okay, and this reflects the training data biases. So if we, a lot of the time what they'll do is they will perpetuate stereotypes. And again, this is just the bias that is within us as humans, because these are just machines or just models, okay? It's basically just numbers at the lowest level. So these things don't understand the bias. They are just seeing the pattern within the data. So they're actually, they're kind of making our biases come out, the biases that we have in our cultures. So again, depending on what part of the world that this thing was developed, then it's going to have a different cultural representation. We've seen this with things like Grok, for example, the XAI tool, and the ability for it to undress people against their will. Now, in some cultures that might be okay, but over in this part of the world, that's not considered okay. All right, so these are limitations. Security and privacy as well is a big one. A lot of these companies that are developing these tools are a wee bit, what's the word? They're not exactly transparent in what they're doing with your data. So the safest thing to do is to not enter any confidential data in there or any personally identifiable information at all. Because what you may be doing is that these models will be trained in future. Okay, so the output from or even the input, so your prompt or the output that it gives you, this could be used for training future models. Okay, and typically whenever you look at the terms and conditions, they will say that any outputs from the model will be used in future to basically, so what they're doing is they're reading your information. So you don't want to put any confidential information in there, any information relating to your organization or to relating to any individual at all. You need to be very careful what you're putting into these models.